She said it so calmly, like she'd been rehearsing that line for weeks. I just need some time to find myself. Let's not contact each other for a while. Her voice didn't shake. There was no sadness, no hesitation, just precision, like she was reading off a carefully prepared statement. I stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Not because I understood, but because I didn't know what else to do. We'd been together for almost 3 years. We met at a concert, a loud, messy night under cheap lights and bad sound. I spilled beer on her shoes. She laughed, called me a walking disaster, and somehow that became our beginning. Emma had this energy that made everything around her feel alive. She was confident, clever, radiant in a way that pulled you in. I thought she was the one. For a long time, I really believed that we shared everything. Weekend trips, playlists, routines, quiet mornings before work. From the outside, it looked solid, but somewhere in the middle of all that, something started to fade. Slowly, quietly. The kind of fading you don't notice until you realize the laughter's been replaced by silence. She began to say things like, "I'm tired, I just feel off. I need space." I thought it was stress, work, life, whatever. I told her to take her time. I gave her room, but that space kept growing until it turned into distance. Every time I tried to talk, she stepped 1 inch further away. Then one night, she called. Her voice was calm to calm, no greeting, no hesitation. "I think we need to take a break. I need to figure out who I am." In the background, I could hear a TV playing, someone laughing from some sitcom. It wasn't the sound of heartbreak. It was the sound of someone already moving on. I asked, "How long is no contact supposed to last?" She said, "I don't know. Until I have clarity. I just need quiet." And that was that. I didn't argue. I didn't beg, because deep down, I knew, once someone starts leaving in their mind, there's no conversation that can bring them back. After that call, the apartment felt heavier than usual. No texts, no late-night calls. Just the hum of the fridge and my own footsteps echoing. I still kept my phone by the bed, not out of hope, just habit. The first few days were the worst. I scrolled through old messages, reread our conversations, trying to find some clue in between the lines. But all I found was silence. By the end of the week, I adjusted. The quiet stopped hurting. I cooked, cleaned, went for runs. The world didn't stop just because she left. It just got quieter. And then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. A Facebook notification. Her mother, Linda, had tagged Emma in a new post. The caption read, "So proud of my baby girl and her new adventures." I didn't think much of it. I tapped it open. The first photo was a beach, clear sky, white sand. The second was Emma. She was smiling, radiant under the sun, hair blowing in the wind, wearing the same necklace I gave her for Christmas. And beside her, a man, tall, tan, his arm wrapped easily around her waist. I stared at the screen, waiting for my mind to rewrite what my eyes were seeing. It didn't. The image was too clear, too normal. Her mother wouldn't have posted that photo by accident. Emma wouldn't have smiled like that if she'd felt guilty. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't react. I just sat there, watching the screen glow and fade, while something cold and heavy settled inside me. It wasn't pain, not yet. It was clarity. The kind that strips away every illusion and leaves you face to face with the truth you'd been trying to avoid. A few hours later, the post disappeared. Maybe Linda realized her mistake. But it didn't matter anymore. The photo had already done what it needed to do, confirmed what I'd suspected, but hadn't dared to say out loud. That night, I didn't cry. I sat in my car for an hour, watching the streetlights paint slow lines across the dashboard. I thought about calling her, asking why. But people like her don't answer why. They just say, it just happened. And for the first time I realized that's all I needed to know. The photo disappeared after a few hours, but not faster than the chill that ran down my spine. Facebook might erase mistakes, but memory doesn't. I didn't need a screenshot. That image was already carved into my head. Her smile, his hand on her waist, and her mother's cheerful caption cutting deeper than any argument ever could. I didn't tell anyone. No friends, no texts, no online confessions. I stayed silent, and that silence turned out to be the only thing that kept me sane. People say anger makes you lose control, but that's not true. Calmness is what truly scares people. I sat there, scrolling through my contacts, my thumb hovering over her name. Part of me wanted to call, not to forgive, but to hear her lie one more time. To see how she'd twist the story, how she'd act surprised that I'd found out. But I stopped, because I knew exactly how it would go. She'd explain. They always do, and people who cheat are always the best at explaining. So I turned off my phone and flipped it face down on the table. I made a cup of coffee. The smell filled the apartment, warm and bitter. I took a sip. It tasted sharper than usual, but somehow cleaner. I didn't feel pain. I felt light. Too light, maybe. The next day, Linda, her mother, sent me a message. Just a few lines. I'm so sorry, Mark. I didn't realize she hadn't told you yet. Things are complicated. I hope you understand. I stared at the message for a long time. No anger, no bitterness. Then I typed back, "It's okay, ma'am. Thank you for being honest." Because truthfully, she hadn't done anything wrong. That tag was an accident, but the kind that fate seems to design to expose what's been hidden. After that, I deleted Linda's number. Not out of resentment, but for closure. Some relationships don't need an audience. Then I started remembering all the signs I'd ignored. The work trips where she didn't want to face. The "I'm too tired tonight" texts followed by stories of her out with friends. I'd brushed them off as coincidences, because that's what people in love do. We build excuses to protect our illusions. But now, every piece fit perfectly. Too perfectly. That evening, I went for a walk round the block. The air was cold, the streetlights dim. I replayed her words again and again in my head. I just need some time to find myself. I smiled a little, not out of sadness, but out of realization. She hadn't been finding herself alone. She'd been finding comfort somewhere else. Some people don't search for themselves in silence. They search for themselves in someone else's arms. And they call it self-discovery. When I got home, I turned on the kitchen light and opened our shared playlist. The first song was one she once said she only listened to when she felt happy. I let it play until the end, then deleted the entire playlist. Not out of spite, but because I didn't want memories pretending to be music anymore. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. No dreams, no wake-ups, no restless thoughts. Just one simple, final truth. It was over. And this time, for real. After that tag, I entered a strange phase, the kind where all emotions seemed stripped away. leaving only deliberate silence. Not the empty kind, but silence with purpose. I stopped checking my phone every morning, stopped hoping for notifications, stopped needing explanations. People think that after betrayal comes the explosion, the crying, the anger, the yelling. But the truth is quieter than that. The real danger begins when you stop wanting to react at all. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I wasn't nostalgic. I was just observing. I watched myself from a distance, like I was studying someone else's life. I noticed how I woke up earlier, brewed coffee slower, cleaned my apartment with surgical precision. Maybe I was trying to restore order, not in the room, but in my mind. Whenever I thought of her, it wasn't the photo that haunted me. It was the silence between us, the pauses I once mistook for peace, but now understood were cracks forming quietly underneath. I realized betrayal doesn't start with action. It starts with distance. And once distance becomes a habit, cheating is just the next logical step. One evening, I found her old hoodie folded in a drawer. Light grey, the collar slightly worn, still faintly carrying her detergent scent. I folded it again, carefully, placed it in a bag, and took it down to the building's trash room. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the bag among 100 other discarded things. No hesitation, no sadness, just necessity, like deleting a corrupted file from your computer. Work started taking over. My schedule became tight, leaving no room for wandering thoughts. I hit the gym every night, headphones in, music loud enough to drown everything else. Every drop of sweat felt like release, not because I forgot, but because I finally didn't need to remember. Then, one day, she sent an email. Subject line, "Can we talk?" Not a text, not a call. An email like a memo. Inside were just a few short paragraphs, polite and distant. She said things had gone too far, that she just wanted a conversation. Not to reconcile, but to end things peacefully. I read the whole thing without emotion. The final line said, "I don't want you to misunderstand what happened." I laughed. Because people aren't afraid of being misunderstood. They're afraid of being understood perfectly. I didn't reply. I left the email unread, buried under old newsletters and spam. I wanted it to stay there, a quiet reminder of something that once mattered, but no longer had any power. In the days that followed, I learned how to be silent without feeling lonely. Silence wasn't emptiness anymore, it was armor. The memories stopped attacking because I stopped giving them permission to. I don't know where Emma is now, or what she's doing, or if she's happy. And strangely, I don't want to know. Peace, I realized, doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from no longer needing to understand. A month after that email, I thought it was finally over. Work was steady. My routines were balanced. The apartment stayed quiet but no longer lonely. I had grown used to the silence. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was equilibrium. Then one night, someone knocked on my door. 3 times. Slow, soft. Not a neighbor, not a delivery. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. And I was right, it was her. Emma stood there, wearing an old jacket, holding a cup of coffee. Her hair messy, the kind of messy that looks intentional until you realize it isn't. Her eyes were red, maybe from crying, maybe from pretending she had. She didn't meet my gaze when she said, quietly, "Can we talk for a bit?" I opened the door. Not because I wanted to hear her out, but because I hate the idea of hiding. She stepped inside. The apartment looked the same as before, only cleaner, sharper, stripped of her presence. She looked around, eyes scanning the space like she was searching for something that no longer existed. "You've been okay?" she asked softly, forcing a smile. "I have," I said. 2 words. Flat, simple. But I could see they hit her harder than any insult could. Because people who leave always want to believe the ones they left behind are still waiting. She sat down, gripping the cup like it might anchor her. "I know you're angry," she began, her voice trembling. "But it's not what you think," I interrupted, calm and steady. "Emma, the sad part is that you still think I want to hear it." Silence. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Maybe she'd expected shouting, or tears, or a second chance. Instead, she found a version of me she didn't recognize, detached, precise, done. She started talking anyway. The same tired lines. I was confused. I didn't mean to. I don't know why it happened. I listened without expression. Every word hit like raindrops on a windshield, faint, repetitive, meaningless. When she finally stopped, I said quietly, "You once told me you needed time to find yourself. Looks like you did. Just not here." Her eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. "I just want you to know it wasn't all fake." I nodded. Maybe not fake, but it's not real anymore either. The air between us went still. She stood, looked around the apartment one last time, and whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't say." "I forgive you," I didn't say. "I understand." Because sometimes forgiveness is just another way of keeping someone who's already gone. And I had no interest in keeping her anymore. At the door, she turned, her eyes wet, waiting for what, I don't know. Maybe for one last chance. Maybe for me to ask her to stay. I just said, quietly, "Go, Emma. Don't come back." The door closed softly. No slam, no shouting, no tears, just silence. The kind of silence I'd been waiting for. I stood there for a while, then went back inside and poured myself another cup of coffee. People say endings are painful. Maybe for some they are. But for me, endings are release. Because not everyone who leaves is a loss. Sometimes they're the reason peace finally finds its way back. After the door closed, I stood still for a long while. No thoughts, no feelings, just the sound of my own breathing, slow and steady, like the room had finally returned to its original state, quiet, empty. Untouched, I went back to the table and poured the last of the coffee into my cup. The warmth spread through my fingers, then faded. Everything in the apartment felt strange, in a peaceful way. Not sad, not happy, just right. She was gone, and for the first time, I didn't feel hollow. I felt light. The kind of lightness that only comes when you finally stop holding on to something that was never yours to keep. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sky was pale grey, half asleep. I made coffee, opened the window, and let the cold air in. The smell of coffee, the faint wind, the quiet, it all reminded me of one simple truth. I was still here, still alive, still fine. No reminders needed, no one beside me. I didn't think about Emma much anymore. Sometimes she flickered in my memory, not as pain, but like an old movie replaying without sound or meaning. Maybe she was somewhere, laughing with someone new, and it didn't matter, because I'd finally learnt that people don't always lose each other because love dies. Sometimes one stops trying, and the other just gets tired. I started investing in myself again, reading, exercising, working with focus. Life no longer revolved around us. It was just me. And oddly, it felt easier to breathe that way. One evening, I drove out of the city, stopped at a small roadside cafe. I sat by the window, watching the dim yellow light flicker across the tabletop, and realized I'd been quiet for weeks, but it wasn't the silence of pain anymore. It was the silence of peace. No explanations, no performances, no need to be understood. I remembered something a friend once told me. When you stop demanding fairness from emotions, that's when peace begins. I didn't get it back then. Now I do. I didn't need justice. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need to be right. All I needed was quiet. Driving home that night, the city stretched out ahead, thousands of lights glowing softly, traffic moving slowly, everything ordinary and calm. I realized life doesn't always need a grand closure. Sometimes it just needs one moment to stop, look at yourself, and accept that not every loss is a tragedy. And in that moment, I understood I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't in love. I was free. Time moved faster than I expected. The wounds I once thought would never heal had turned into faint scars, still there, but quiet, painless. I can't pinpoint the exact moment things began to feel lighter. Maybe it was the morning I made coffee without thinking of her. Maybe it was the day I opened my phone and didn't instinctively search for Emma's name. Or maybe it was the moment I stopped needing to know why. Life quietly found its rhythm again, simple, unhurried, complete in its stillness. I went to work, came home, worked out, read, sometimes just sat still for hours listening to the clock tick. Not because I was lonely, but because silence finally felt safe. My apartment had changed a bit, a few plants by the window, some paintings I hung myself. Small things, but they made the space feel alive. Maybe they made me feel alive too, growing, healing. No longer trapped in the echo of what used to be. Sometimes I'd see couples on the street, hands intertwined, laughing softly, eyes full of trust. I didn't feel jealous or sad. I just smiled because I understood. I had been there once. We'd had our moments, the waiting for a text nights, the quiet phone calls, the way the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us. Now, those moments were warm memories, not something to erase, not something to chase, just something that happened once while scrolling through social media. I saw Emma's face in the people you may know section. A new profile picture, the same smile, soft light across her face, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. I didn't click, didn't delete, didn't save. I just looked for a second, then scrolled past like seeing a scene from a movie you've already watched, knowing how it ends. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how time reshapes everything. People you thought you couldn't live without, you eventually do. Feelings you thought would never fade, they become background noise. I used to think I needed closure, a conversation, an explanation, some kind of neat ending. Now I realize some stories don't need closure, they just need to stop. One afternoon, I left work early and took a walk by the lake. The wind was soft, the leaves fell slowly, ripples spread across the water. I sat on a bench, watching the sun dip below the skyline. Everything was still, No noise, no rush, just air and light and quiet. And I realized I wasn't waiting for anyone to come back or for myself to forget. I was just living, genuinely, quietly, without trying to prove anything. Time doesn't erase the past. It just teaches you how to live alongside it without letting it hurt you anymore. I no longer remembered her voice clearly, no longer flinched when an old song came on. Instead, there was calm. I could think of Emma and smile, not because I wanted her back, but because I knew everything had gone exactly the way it was meant to. They say peace is when you can sit alone and not feel lonely. I think that's true. Peace isn't about forgetting someone. It's about no longer letting them decide how you feel. As I looked out the window that night, the city lights blinked on one by one, windows glowing across buildings, each holding its own story. I wasn't searching for her in any of them. I just felt light, as if, after everything, I had finally come home to myself, and maybe that's what peace really means. It started like any ordinary morning. The sun spilled through the blinds, slicing the room into thin layers of light and shadow. The air was still cool, untouched by the noise of the day. Everything around me looked the same: the old chair, the small coffee table, the half-read book on the armrest, but the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't hollow. It was peaceful. I moved slowly, deliberately, brewed my coffee, let the smell fill the room. No rush, no waiting, no phone lighting up with messages I used to hope for. I turned on the radio, not the sad songs I'd once used to fill the silence, but a light, mellow jazz tune, the kind that hums in the background, unbothered by the weight of the past. For the first time, I realized that maybe peace doesn't come with grand revelations or perfect closure. Sometimes it just arrives quietly when you stop chasing what hurt you. We spend so much time trying to fix what's broken, believing that healing means going back to what used to be. But the truth is, healing is learning to live without needing to. I used to think being alone meant failing. Now I see it as proof that I survived. There was a time when I measured happiness by who stayed. Now I measure it by how little I need to explain. I used to check my phone the moment I woke up, wondering if she'd changed her mind, if maybe there was still a bridge left unburned. But bridges don't rebuild themselves, and sometimes it's better they don't. I still think of Emma occasionally, not out of longing or regret, just as one remembers a distant summer, warm, fleeting, and gone. She was part of my story, not the whole book, and maybe that's all she was ever meant to be. One Saturday, I took a drive beyond the city. No destination in mind, just the open road, the sound of tires against asphalt, and the sky stretching endlessly ahead. The leaves had started to fall, scattering gold across the pavement. I rolled down the windows and let the wind rush in, cool and clean. It carried the faint smell of pine and something else, something like freedom, that feeling. It was quiet, not euphoric, but it was mine. It wasn't about escaping her anymore. It was about returning to myself. At the edge of a small hill, I pulled over. The sun was beginning to set, soft orange melting into deep blue. I stepped out, sat on the grass, and watched the light fade. It struck me then how endings aren't really the opposite of beginnings. They're just the same moment, seen from a different side. I thought about everything that had happened, the silence, the distance, the confrontation, the acceptance. None of it felt like loss anymore. It felt like growing up. We don't heal by forgetting. We heal by remembering without pain. And that's what I felt, sitting there with the wind brushing against my face. Not grief, not nostalgia, just stillness. I thought about the night she said she needed space to find herself. Back then, it sounded cruel, selfish. Now, I understand. Maybe she did find herself. And maybe, in losing her, I found mine too. When I drove back into the city, the streets were glowing with headlights and the buzz of life returning. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I was part of it again, not waiting, not hoping, just being. I parked the car, walked up to my apartment, and paused before unlocking the door. Through the glass, I could see the faint reflection of myself, calm eyes, steady breath, no weight behind them anymore. I smiled, not the kind of smile that hides pain, but the kind that comes from peace, because the truth is, we never really move on from the people who changed us. We just stop needing them to come back. I turned the key, stepped inside, and for the first time, the silence didn't echo. It just existed. And so did I. That night I sat by the window with another cup of coffee. The city was alive, laughter from somewhere below, a siren in the distance, the soft hum of everything continuing. I realized then, life doesn't wait for you to be ready to start again. It just keeps moving, and one day, without noticing, you move with it. I thought I had lost so much, but in truth, I'd only shed what wasn't meant to stay, and maybe that's the quiet miracle of letting go. It doesn't end anything. It begins everything.